just had never.
This is
stopped.
fascinating
So,
to listen to.
Completely fiction, but that was the general image of the Rangers, right? This lone, solitary figure who went off and fought crime and bad guys against astronomical odds and always won. That still is the image of the Rangers that many would like to see prevail today. That's part of what I was trying to go against here. I'll give you an example. Here's an example I want to talk about is a Ranger named James Callahan, who in 1855, in response to some Indian attacks, was charged by the governor of Texas to round up a Ranger company and cross the river into Mexico and pursue these marauding Indians, which he did. However, the historical consensus, not that it's been broadly written about, but the historical consensus is that Callahan was actually looking for runaway slaves. And this time, the 1850s in Texas, the Underground Railroad ran south. Slaves escaped from Texas into Mexico, where slavery had been outlawed, and they found their freedom there. So Callahan and his Rangers actually were looking to capture these slaves, bring them back across the border, and sell them. So they crossed the river in 1855, immediately encountered some Mexican soldiers and some Indians and maybe some slaves, lost a battle badly, had to retreat to the town of Piedras Negras, just across the river from Texas, and to fully retreat without being obliterated, burned down the village of Piedras Negras and then escaped. So it was a colossal failure. It was a disaster at the hands of Callahan. And many people saw it as such then. However, after Callahan's death, his fellow Rangers and his supporters and other writers who looked
rewrote the history,
began to rehabilitate his reputation.
Wow, white people.
And write about how heroic his mission had been, how he was chasing Indians. No mention of runaway slaves, and how he had whipped the Mexicans across the border when actually he had lost badly. This went on and on for decades, these stories about the heroism of Callahan. Eventually, Callahan County in West Texas was named for him.
Named the whole county after a lie.
He was interred and moved to the Texas State Cemetery in Austin, which is supposedly the Arlington of Texas, where the heroes are buried. And on his tombstone there, it says he went into Mexico to pursue Indians. Again, no mention of slaves. So this is an example of someone whose mission was, shall we say, not entirely clean, and was a tactical disaster in and of itself, was an embarrassment,
but rewritten
over the years has been turned
into something
into
else.
One of these idealized Rangers, and this has happened again and again and again.
I do want to focus some time on the Texas Rangers and indigenous people in Texas. Earlier mentioned about early skirmishes between the Karankawas and the Rangers. What would eventually happen to the Karankawas?
And earlier it was mentioned that the Texas Rangers were killing children,
occupying
burning villages,
Texas, and what
destroying innocent people.
Well, Stephen F. Austin, the so-called father of modern Texas, he's the one who brought in the original settlers. He made his first trip to Texas in 1821. He and a handful of riders were crossing Texas, and they got their first look at the Karankawa. And Austin declared at that moment, these people must be exterminated.
Wow.
So that was the Rangers' mission early on, to the Rangers and the militia, to exterminate the Karankawa, and they did within a few years. Maybe, several thousand, perhaps, Karankawa were pretty much wiped off the face of the earth. The Rangers helped drive the Cherokee out of Texas. The Cherokee were a so-called civilized tribe. They had schools, they planted crops.
They did everything the U.S. government wanted.
Yeah, I mean, that's that wasn't enough. No, they had the land that the Texans wanted. So the Rangers helped drive them out of Texas and into Oklahoma. The Rangers' most notorious battles were with the Comanche, and the Comanche were probably at one point the most powerful tribe of Native Americans in North America, and they were especially fierce and dominant in Texas. So the Rangers and the Army and militiamen all fought the Comanches. The Comanches fought back very hard. What turned the tide, though, eventually was the Patterson Colt revolver, 5-shot revolver that the Rangers were among the first to use. And that revolutionized battle against the Comanches and other Native Americans. So eventually the Rangers and the U.S. Army were able to drive the Comanches out of Texas as well.
Yeah, the Comanches, that's an important story. They had mastered the horse. They were some of the greatest warriors known of at the time. This is where we get the rise of Quanah Parker.
That's right. They were masters. On foot, they weren't much. They were sort of small and squat and maybe a little clumsy. But when they got on horseback, they were, and many people said who saw them, they were the greatest riders they'd ever seen. And the Comanches mastered the art of, they fashioned a little leather loop, and they would be able to lean down as they were riding under the horse's neck and fire arrows from under the horse's neck. And thereby, they were not much of a target, and they could just unleash these arrows at a remarkably rapid clip. So the Rangers and the others who were firing with their single-shot muskets and pistols weren't much of a match for this. But once the 5-shot revolver came along, that turned the tide.
That changes the tide, because now you can, within a very short period of time, fire 5 shots.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that revolver changed history.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's been called the gun that's made, saved the West, won the West, whatever. I mean, certainly it was a huge part of that.
Yeah.
And it started with the Rangers. Colt had tried to market his revolver unsuccessfully, and it was pretty much out of business. But the so-called Texas Navy, which many people have never heard of, bought a bunch of these revolvers, never used them much, and somehow the Rangers, a company under the command of Captain Jack Hayes, got these revolvers and began using them against the Comanches and realized what they had pretty fast.
Can you talk to me and turn back to sort of the Texas Rangers and the history of African Americans in Texas? And maybe in particular, we could talk about the NAACP. We brought up the NAACP when we were talking about what happened in 1957, when students were not allowed to, black students were not allowed to enroll in school and desegregate schools. But this history you mentioned, bounty hunters basically finding slaves and returning them. But even in the early 20th century, the Texas Rangers played an instrumental role in actually driving the NAACP out of the state.
Yeah, in a couple of cases. Go back to the year 1919, which that was known as the Red Summer. Across the South, many racial disturbances, a lot of violence, lynchings, that sort of thing. And also in Texas, in the town of Longview, they came very close to erupting in just a race war. So the government of Texas and the Rangers were very concerned about this, about racial problems and about race wars and violence.
What do we mean by race wars?
White people and black people firing guns at each other en masse, in town, going after each other, almost like, unofficial armies. So the Rangers were concerned about this. But what they did, under governor's orders, I have to add, in 1919, they went across the state meeting with sheriffs and police departments, police chiefs, and other officials, trying to figure out how to quash the civil rights of black people so that they could keep black people down. And they made plans to infiltrate any NAACP meetings or any other meetings where black people were discussing their rights. They conspired with postmasters in towns of Texas not to deliver any so-called inflammatory literature that might come through the mail that was going to black people. Like, say, for example, a newspaper out of Chicago that was written for black people. The postmasters were ordered not to deliver that. They conspired with gun shop owners not to sell any weapons to black people, even though that would have been legal at the time. So there was a statewide conspiracy led by the Rangers to do this, to deprive black people of their rights. At one point, the national leader of the NAACP, John Siyayy, came to Austin to try to meet with the governor. The governor wouldn't see him. He tried to meet with the adjutant general of the Rangers. The adjutant general wouldn't see him, but he did meet with the assistant adjutant general in Austin, state capital, and said he believed his life was in danger. Siyayy did, and the adjutant general wouldn't do anything about it. So Siyayy went out to the streets of Austin, and he was passed upon by 3 or 4 local government officials who beat him bloody, and they put him on a train and told him to get out of Texas and never come back. So that's how the NAACP was treated in Austin and in Texas in 1919 by the state government.
They were kicked out of the state. When did they come back?
Well, they were back on and off. They were certainly back in 1956 when they were trying to integrate Texas schools. But at that point, Texas officials decided they wanted to get the NAACP out of the state. So they had a cooperative judge, declare them an illegal organization, and they were banished from the state for a couple of years.
Doug Swanson is the author of the book Cult of Glory, the bold and brutal history of the Texas Rangers. Wow. This is a book that has been credited with the recent removal of a statue of Captain J. Banks from a Dallas Love Field Airport to be specific. Captain J. Banks in 1957 helped keep black students from being able to enroll in schools in Texas. Doug Swanson is also a veteran news reporter. He spent much of his career with the Dallas Morning News. He's a research assistant professor of English at the University of Pittsburgh. Is it your time? I think you spent something like 3 decades reporting in Dallas. Is it during this time that this story piqued your interest?
Yeah, I was at the Dallas Morning News for, let me count that up, about 34 years. Boy, a long time. Not all of that in Texas, some in New York and some in California, but most of it in Texas. And I'd had a lot of dealings with the Rangers, and they were almost all good. I didn't come into this with any agenda. However, as I said earlier, I had this image of the Rangers, like many other people did, that was formed by television and movies, and I had carried around in my head for a long time the idea that there must be more to this, and maybe it would be good to take a full, hard look at the Rangers. And there have been many people who came before me, many scholars, many historians, who had explored this unflattering history of the Rangers, but almost always in very discrete parts, a certain era, a certain period, or a certain place. And I couldn't find anyone who had examined the Rangers in this way over the entire 198 years of the existence of the Rangers. So that's what I tried to do. But don't get me wrong, there have been many scholars in Texas and elsewhere who've done remarkable work on the Rangers. It's just it didn't get much attention.
Did the Texas Rangers, I believe former Texas Rangers spoke to you, but did anyone who's currently affiliated with the Rangers speak to you for this book?
One Ranger, Ranger Brandon Bess, who is in Liberty County, deep in East Texas. I spent the day with him. He was a great guy. I thought he was a terrific Ranger. I think he's a terrific Ranger. I think he does everything right. He does everything the way one is supposed to. So I thought he was a great credit to the agency. Now, the officials, the high officials in the agency, the top Rangers, the top officials at the Department of Public Safety, ignored all my requests for interviews, information, anything for a good 5 years. I mean, I wrote them, called them, emailed them repeatedly, asking to speak with them. I submitted questions. I told them what I was interested in, what I was doing, and they just stonewalled me. And that's not unusual now with the Department of Public Safety. A lot of reporters in Texas have difficulty dealing with them, getting information. So I'm not sure they were singling me out, but I got no cooperation from them.
It's not like you're an unknown person in the area. I mean, spending all those years with the Dallas Morning News.
Well, maybe I made a tactical mistake. With the Morning News, I had written a couple of stories critical of the Department of Public Safety. So, maybe I was on their blacklist. I don't know. But they just wanted nothing to do with me.
In our remaining time, I do want to get one more story from you. And this is more contemporary history. And I'm hoping you will talk to us about a man by the name of Henry Lee Lucas. Who was Henry Lee Lucas?
Henry Lee Lucas was a one-eyed drifter with an IQ on a good day of 87 who wandered into Texas in the early 1980s with his common law bride. He was in his mid-40s. She was 15. And he did odd jobs around his town in North Texas. And pretty soon, his common law wife turned up missing. And so did an older woman he did jobs for. And police figured out pretty quickly that Lucas was probably the one who made them disappear. He probably killed them and buried their bones out in the prairie somewhere. So they arrested Lucas. At that point, he began confessing to dozens of crimes. Eventually, he began confessing to hundreds of crimes, and the Rangers took him into their custody and established the Henry Lee Lucas Task Force in the early 1980s. Lucas confessed to more than 200 murders. Police would come in from all over the country with their unsolved murders, and Lucas would confess to them, and they would clear these murders. Because of that, Lucas got special treatment. He had his own cell in the county jail with a carpet on the floor, cable TV. He loved cigarettes and strawberry milkshakes, so he had an endless supply of that. The Rangers were treated as heroes because they had the man who appeared to be, at the time, the worst serial killer in American history. Maybe killed 300 people all across the country, never left a single clue. Not a fingerprint, not a hair, nothing. This was a criminal mastermind, even though he had a room temperature IQ. So everyone was feeling great. There were movie deals being struck. There were books being written. The Rangers were heroes. Lucas was getting all the special treatment. And then the Dallas Times-Herald in 1985, along with District Attorney Vic Pazell in McLennan County, Texas, exposed it all as a hoax. They showed that Lucas could not have committed the vast majority of these murders because he was elsewhere when they happened. They showed, when Lucas was supposedly killing people in California, he was doing odd jobs in Jacksonville, Florida, or he was living in Maryland. He could not have been driving all over the country killing these people. It was a hoax. So it collapsed in 1985. And Lucas was sent to prison after confessing to killing one woman identified only as Orange Socks. He was put on death row. Governor George Bush commuted the sentence, the only death sentence Bush ever commuted, because he saw that Lucas probably didn't commit this crime. All along, the Rangers said, well, we didn't know this. We didn't know that Lucas could not have committed these crimes. We were just making him available to other departments. We were only a clearinghouse. We did not investigate Lucas. We could not have done that. That was their line all along. We didn't know. So eventually, their Lucas records were decommissioned and sent to the state archives, and they sat in the Texas State Archives for many years until I came along and started looking at them a few years ago. And what I quickly realized was the Rangers did know. They had tracked Lucas's movements. They had long lists of conflicts with his case. They realized that he could not have committed the vast majority of these murders he had confessed to and that had been cleared. And they had absolute evidence in some cases that he was not the killer. Yet they did not turn this evidence over to some of the police departments who were involved. So in one example, I turned this evidence over to the police department in Baytown, Texas, down near Houston, and they reopened a couple of murder cases on the basis of that, and now those are open cases. The question is, what harm did this cause? Well, I think it caused a tremendous amount of harm, because when these cases were closed, because Lucas confessed to the deaths, the investigation stopped. Yeah. So no one was chasing the real killer all these years. For 35, 40 years, no one was looking for the real killer of these people, because everyone said, hey, it was Henry Lee Lucas. And the Rangers were complicit in this.
Why?
Well, that's a good question, and I've never been able to get an answer from the Rangers. Neither has anyone else. My theory, I think, accords with some of the theories of other reporters who've worked on this. Hugh Ainsworth, who worked on it for the Dallas Times-Herald, and I both believe that it was because here comes this word, they loved the glory. They got so addicted to being treated as heroes. I mean, they flew all over the country with Lewis, and they were showered with gifts and dinners and banquets, speeches. Here are the great Texas Rangers, and they've got this most dangerous man, and they're helping us solve all these crimes. And, it was glory for them. And I think they couldn't step away from that. Now, I'm sure if some of these Rangers heard me saying this right now and they were standing next to me, they'd probably take out their guns and shoot me. But I can't come up with any other reason. And I'm not the only one who has come up with this explanation. Wow. I can't find any other explanation. Why would they sit on evidence? Why would they not tell police departments that, hey, you got the wrong guy, and we have the absolute proof that you have the wrong guy? They hid it.
Are you in Texas now?
No, I'm in Pittsburgh. I'm not a popular guy in Texas now, from what I can tell from Facebook and other social media. Once that statue went down, the Ranger supporters got a little heated, and
really,
I'm not on top of their happy list.
So you've been getting a lot of heat because of this statue.
Yeah, Texas is like a lot of places, but more so big on these symbols. I mean, there is to me something very similar to the lost causers of the Confederacy. The whole the statue of Robert E. Lee comes down, and a lot of people go berserk for reasons that a lot of us don't think are entirely defensible, but nonetheless, they get very impassioned about it. And the same thing has happened with this Ranger statue. You can go a little nuts sometimes reading the comments on Facebook, but there's a lot of comments. This is the Rangers, this is Texas. People don't understand our heritage, and that sort of thing. Well, the heritage is important, but what I believe is there are many parts to the heritage, and a lot of these parts have been overlooked. So I think it's important to consider those who have been voiceless for so long. Let's consider other points of view. Let's think about what it's like for people who feel they've been victimized by the Rangers for decades. Let's think about their viewpoints here, and let's examine all sides of this. That's the way I think is the best way to look at it.
The Rangers fought with the Confederacy in the Civil War.
Yeah, they weren't technically Rangers at that point, but there were some companies of former Rangers who were with the Confederacy. A lot of the Rangers stayed behind in Texas and fought Indians during the Civil War. Not too well, not too effectively, but the Rangers after the Civil War were pretty much disbanded for a few years and only reformed in the 1870s.
Have you heard from the Rangers themselves about your book?
No, not a word. I mean, if they're saying anything, they're not talking to me. But, they're going to have to face up. The 200th anniversary is coming up in 2023. And, of course, there are going to be celebrations. I mean, this is Texas, after all. And I hope there is some acknowledgement of the many facets of Ranger history here. I hope it's not all how great the Rangers were, and, the same stuff we've been hearing for so many years. I hope there is an acknowledgement, a reckoning, and some fairness here. I don't think that would diminish the Rangers. I think that would make the Rangers greater if they were to come clean and talk about these uncomfortable moments in their history. And let's try to embrace the entire state. I mean, Texas is a majority minority state now. It's 32% Hispanic. Now it's only 45% white, non-Hispanic at this point. So the state is changing a lot, and the Rangers themselves have changed with it, but I think these attitudes need to change, and the acknowledgments need to change. That's what I would really like to see. But no, they haven't said anything to me yet. If they're saying anything about the book. I haven't heard it yet.
And finally, just going back to Henry Lee Lucas for a moment, and going through all the documents that you did and seeing that there was this recognition from the Rangers that Henry Lee Lucas could have no way have committed all these murders. Is there not anyone on the inside trying to say, hey, we shouldn't be doing this, or this isn't right?
Most of the people who were involved with the Lucas cases are gone. They're retired.
Yeah.
I spoke with Ranger Bob Prince, retired, who was head of the Lucas Task Force. And I laid all this out to him, and he said, no, we didn't do that. And I said, what about this evidence I have in front of me that it was a lab analysis of Lucas's signature that showed he was in Jacksonville, Florida, when supposedly he was killing people in Texas. And I said, what about this? And Prince said, I don't know anything about that. And I said, why did the Rangers do this? And he said, we must have done okay because I was promoted from sergeant to captain after that happened. Now, I'll give Ranger Prince this. He stood up and he answered my questions. I don't agree with anything he said, but, he stood up and faced up to it and answered questions. But that is generally the attitude, and it prevails. No, we didn't do anything wrong. I don't care what your records show. We were right. Maybe he didn't kill all those people, but he killed a lot of them. That's often what they throw out there. It's not only implausible, it's impossible. But there's just not a facing up to it, and it's not just Lucas. It's a lot of these aspects of Ranger history. I mean, the Rangers killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Mexicans and Mexican Americans along the Texas-Mexican border in the early 1900s. Many people have written about this before me, but try to find some acknowledgement of that in the Ranger official history or in the Ranger museums in Texas. If it may be mentioned, in about 10 seconds, but that's about it. So I'd like to see a lot more of that when we start talking about the glorious 200-year history of the Rangers, and I don't use that term lightly. There have been some glorious moments. There have been many heroic moments, but there are these other aspects that we really need to look at so we can understand, where the Rangers need to go now. They're always going to be Rangers because it's officially against the law in Texas to abolish the Rangers. That is a state statute.
Doug Swanson has been our guest. Doug Swanson is the author of the book Cult of Glory: The Bold and Brutal History of the Texas Rangers. Doug Swanson is a veteran journalist. He spent many years at the Dallas Morning News. Currently, he's a research assistant professor of English at the University of Pittsburgh. Doug Swanson, that was a very interesting and informative conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. My pleasure. Great talking to you.
That does it for Letters and Politics.
Now, I'm going to buy this book just to give out, because I think this book has basically not only reaffirmed that my research has always been on point, from the Celts to the Franks, the Iberians, the takeover of Robert the Old, to drive out the Moors. But now I'm very clear about black people now. This changed my thing about black people. Now I realize racism, the true strength of racism, is perpetuated by black on black verbal attacks. The only thing that the white man has done, he takes the weakest black people and he makes the weakest black people be his military, be his everything. He takes the black people that have a hard time fighting back, and he makes them his servants. And because they want to get a coin, they want to get a bag, they're willing to serve against other black people, verbally and otherwise. This is really amazing. I'm really thrown on how this panned out. This whew, wow. Just, I mean, they did the same thing the Greeks did. And while black people are fighting each other verbally, this is what they should be fighting. This is what they should be focused on. But they're not. They're focused on each other, tribalism. Your tribe, my tribe. The Liberians against the ADOS Americans, and the Liberians against the American Liberians, and the Ghanas against this. I realize what's happening now. I'm very crystal clear on what's happening now. Very crystal clear. Meanwhile, the white woman is bonding with the evil that her white man does against others in an effort for her son and her daughter to take over. Let me say it again, because I think it's really important. Meanwhile, the white woman is bonding with the evil that some of these white guys do in an effort to get her children at the top. I am crystal clear now. I am extremely clear now. I don't even blame, after listening to all this stuff, I don't even blame black people no more, because I've wholeheartedly now realized black people are the reason why racism even exists. Because you gotta have black people participation. When black people are fighting back, it's the children of the people who fight back who say, no, let's not fight. Let's just get along. This is off the chain. This is off the chain. That just changed my whole. I mean, I knew it was going on, but just the level of it's not getting enough attention, and golly, man, we black people, man, we could be fighting for our children, and we just not. We just not. Everything is a joke. Everything is black people are the reason why this stuff is going on. That's just like when a biracial person gets with the white person and have a white child, and that white child gets with a white person and has a white child, and that white child gets with a person that has a white child. The child from that person, they got the complexion for protection. Now they want to be anti-black. This is all making sense. Wow. I don't even know how to feel about that. Wow. life-changing. Really life-changing. Really, really life-changing. Very life-changing.